Greetings, fellow explorers. This is Tony with Fount Systems Network, and we're here in pursuit of low-carbon innovations for seawater desalination. Today's episode is part 2 of my interview with Jonathan Walters. As you might remember, Jonathan is an energy economist, and he's currently working as a consultant. Previously, he was a director at the World Bank, I think for over 25 years. In a prior episode, we reviewed the World Bank's Renewable Energy Desalination Report for the Middle East, North Africa. That was from 2012, and Jonathan was responsible for commissioning the report. So I thought he'd be a good person to interview to get his point of view on the state of the industry of renewable energy and desalination in the Middle East, and some speculation about what that report might look like if it were commissioned in 2020. I'm going to post a link above. If you're new to Fount Systems Network, that's our work plan. You can see where we are in the process. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Let's get started.
And on desalination, you know how intensive it is in its use of fossil fuel resources. And certainly in our region, which in Jordan, in Saudi, in the United Arab Emirates, in Oman, all of these Gulf states have relied heavily on desalination for years, and it's fossil fuel derived. I mean, it's fossil fuel derivative. And so I can see where your interest in trying to manage or plan transitions away from fossil fuels. It would be hard to avoid desalination at some point.
Yeah, I mean, particularly, what led the Gulf countries to desalination relatively early will eventually lead the other countries in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa region, to desalination on a increasing basis, simply because, if your demand for water is growing because populations are growing and urbanization is growing and incomes are growing, and the supply of water of natural water is not going to increase. In fact, with climate change, it may well come under more stress. And yes, in every country, there are efficiency gains you could make in your water treatment and distribution system, but they will never, those efficiency gains, even if they're made, will never keep up with the growth in demand over a period of time. So sooner or later, everybody will have to resort to desalination. So how they do the desalination becomes extremely important, not just to those countries, but globally, because of the amount of energy that's being absorbed in the desalination and the emissions that come from that energy if it's not clean energy. So it's a very important issue for the countries, and it's a very important issue.
How was the report received? Did you see any policy changes? Have you seen anything in the last 8 years that have come about in different countries as a result of?
So how it was received, it was received very well. There was a lot of interest in what the report said, but we knew there would be, because we decided to do the report because through our many and various interactions with governments and the private sector around the region, there were a lot of people asking, what is the best way to move forward with desalination based on renewable energy? Has there been change in the region since the report was done? There are a number of countries that are embracing renewable energy much more than they were. It has in any case been quite a marked shift in desalination technology away from predominantly thermal desalination to desalination based on electricity, reverse osmosis. And that means that you're generally going to be drawing your electricity from a grid, and it will be as green as the grid is green. And so, since many countries in the region have significantly more renewable electricity on their grid than they used to, desalination is greener than it was, or more renewable than than it was. You could also ask, why were we so focused on concentrated solar power, and
Sure.
would we be so focused on it now? So I think you have to look at it a bit in context. At the time that the report was being written, which is, we were writing it in 2011, 2012, there weren't that many cheap alternatives to produce renewable electricity, right? Large scale, cheap photovoltaics was not yet really available. I mean, it's hard to remember that because now it's very much available. It's large and it's cheap. But back then, that wasn't a widespread thing. Still less was energy storage with photovoltaics or with wind power a widespread thing. So to get continuous supply was much more feasible with concentrated solar power that already had storage solutions being quite common, molten salt storage solutions, thermal storage solutions. And that it was pretty clear that a larger scale use of CSP with storage globally would bring down the costs quite substantially. It has come down substantially.
Yes.
The cost of PV has come down more from great heights, but it's come down more. A CSP with storage plant can provide you, these days it can provide you 24-hour electricity pretty much every day of the year because of the storage. To do that with PV would be incredibly expensive because PV has to fill a battery. In most configurations, has to fill a battery, and batteries storing, all the time the sun, to provide electricity all the time the sun isn't shining. I mean, all night and the parts of the day when the sun is not shining. Batteries that store that long are phenomenally expensive. Batteries that store for 2, 3, 4 hours, no, they're getting cheap. But the longer the storage, it's still phenomenally expensive. There could always be a technology breakthrough, but you don't know that's going to happen till it's happened, and it hasn't happened yet. So those were the reasons for focusing on CSP. Now, I think if we were writing it now, we would focus more on hybrid renewable solutions. We would say, okay, you can use PV during the daytime, at least when it's sunny. And in most parts of the Middle East and North Africa, the sun is pretty reliable all day. And then you can be using CSP to fill the storage for nighttime use. And that way, by hybridizing PV and CSP and molten salt storage, you can get 24-hour supply reasonably cheaply. And that's what you're seeing Dubai doing, for example. That's what you're seeing
in the UAE. Yeah, the Noor Energy One is an energy park that combines different.
Yeah, and Morocco, the Delta Solar project is doing that, and I think that's only going to increase across sunny countries that are sunny enough, cloudless enough, for long enough to do CSP. It will be combined with PV, because PV, when it's operating, is cheaper than the CSP, but you can get the benefit of the cheap CSP storage if you use the CSP along with the PV. And I think that's what we're gonna see a lot of, because that combination in a lot of places, including I think in Dubai, outcompetes natural gas for power supply. It definitely outcompetes coal. And so just on economic grounds, we're going to see a lot of that, particularly in the parts of the world where the direct normal irradiation, the solar irradiation, is good enough to do the CSP part, which means the whole of the Middle East, North Africa, and
So to continue on that, if you were doing the report in 2012, you would anticipate that the technology focus would be more on these hybrid CSP photovoltaic plants. But you have these seawater desalination facilities. Would you imagine that the thermal electric, the fossil fuel powered electrical facility would be decommissioned over time, and that the power generated from these new solar parks would go to charge the grid, and that would in turn be channeled into the seawater desalination facility?
Yeah, basically. I mean, how rapidly the existing thermal desal plants would be decommissioned, that's going to be a case-by-case thing, depending on the economics, the contracts, and so on. But basically, the scenario you just described.
So let's say hypothetically you're shutting down the fossil fuel powered electrical power plant. You're losing that heat input, which was the surplus heat that was driving the thermal desalination process. If you have the solar park set up, then the concentrating solar power would be generating enough heat that you could actually drive that directly, I think, into driving those existing thermal desalination processes. It's strictly theoretical, but it's back to that kind of retrofit approach in a scenario where you're phasing out fossil fuels.
It could be, if that was the more economic solution than using the heat to generate electricity and putting that directly or indirectly into the osmosis plant. Yes, you could do that. To what extent that would happen if you were looking at it now, I don't know. I mean, that's a question of how the numbers would come out and what the contracts say and so on. But yes, theoretically, you have.
It's fun to speculate.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Jonathan, you've been very generous with your time this morning. I do appreciate it.
You're most welcome.
So I really enjoyed that interview with Jonathan. I hope you did as well. It was educational for me, and it was nice to get a point of view on the way the industry of desalination, but also renewable energy, are changing in the Middle East, North Africa region. If you like what you see here, please like and subscribe to the network. There's going to be a lot more quality, original content around renewable energy in seawater desalination. In the process of working on this, I've really made a lot of wonderful discoveries. There's a very exciting world of industry, organizations, governments that are working along this same line of innovation and thinking. So I'll be sharing that with you all, and there will be a new revised work plan coming up here pretty soon, because the discoveries I've made are really changing the way I'm thinking about this work process. So again, if you like what you see here, please like and subscribe. And remember, everyone, keep exploring, keep growing. I'll see you next time.